How do you feel right now about the Denver Nuggets, who haven't looked quite as dominant over the last couple of weeks? Memphis now have Ja back. The Kings have still more or less been doing their thing over the last few weeks. Do you think there's any chance that they slip out of that one seed? And do you feel any bit more concerned about them going into the playoffs now as you did a few weeks ago?
So I will say, I think overall I might be a little bit more excited about hosting Jeopardy than I am about Denver's chances come playoff time. I think that overall, if you said, do I think this team is going to fall out of the one seed? I think not. I think at this point, when you're in a place where you have like not even 10 games left in the season, maybe 10 at most, I just don't think right now the Grizzlies stand 3.5 games behind them. I just don't think you're making that up. No matter what teams you're playing, strength of schedule is what it is. But at the end of the day, I think they're just a good enough team where they're going to get wins against whoever they face. And while they might not be as dominant, I just think they'll get enough wins to definitely protect a 3.5 game lead as we get towards the end of the season.
Yeah, it gets a little interesting, like with John Morant coming back and, the Grizzlies trying to get healthy at the right time. But like Gabe said, like you got a 3.5 game lead. Probably not enough time for Memphis to make up that much ground unless the Nuggets just continue to completely fall apart. Like they go ahead, go on another like 5 game losing streak or something like that. But I don't see that happening. They're too solid of a team to do that. But I will say we've been seeing a lot of what Devin was talking about a few weeks ago when he said like they're not really contenders in his eyes. We're seeing a lot of that ring true. Like the defense has just been abysmal lately. And that might be more so what they actually are defensively, even though for a better part of the season, like about 2.5 months, they were a solid defensive team. But they might be closer to this team that's not really good defensively, which is very concerning because I don't have that much faith in their offense outside of Nikola Jokic in the playoffs. And even though he is the one generating everything, we talked about the questions we have, like with Jamal Murray, with Michael Porter Jr., and just those others, like who's really going to step up for them in the postseason. So it's concerning for sure. Do I think they're going to lose a 1 seed? No, I would probably, bet a lot of money that they hang on to the 1 seed, but it's definitely concerning once we get to the postseason, and that first round matchup could be a tough one for them depending on who they face.
Definitely. It's a little bit of a regression to what they actually are, I think, defensively. And that's typically what we see from Denver. It's usually not in the regular season, but come playoff time, other teams across the league up their intensity. Their personnel shortens in terms of their rotations on their bench. Some of those offensive guys that are poor defensively don't play as much. And Denver just don't look as good across the board compared to their competition. We're starting to see that a little bit again now come the end of the season. With that being said, I still don't think they slip out of that 1 seed, but it is worth noting they do play the Bucks, 76ers, Warriors, Suns twice, and the Kings. So they don't have an easy run-in by any stretch. So if Memphis go crazy, it is possible. But I would imagine they don't fall off a cliff too much to the point where that becomes an issue. But it definitely is speaking to a point where, yeah, Denver are good, but like you say, depending on who their first round matchup is, which could be a team that is really struggling and falling their way down into the play-in and they're okay, or it could be a team that is on their way up, moving in through the play-in and becomes a really tough matchup for Denver. So it's going to be tough to, depending on who that matchup becomes, but either way, still a good team. That offense is still great. Jokic is still the centerpiece of that. I will say there's been a few games over the last couple of weeks where we're starting to see Jokic-led bench lineups and not Jamal Murray-led bench lineups, and that's nice to see because having your offensive hub be your guy with your bench units who don't create offense as well is finally a decision that probably needed to be made, and that's looking a little bit better offensively. But outside of that, they're fine. But I don't think that they're showing anything that, at least personally, that I've been surprised by. They're just looking like the team that I kind of expected heading into the postseason.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I do think it's probably designed that they're doing that now just because you think once the playoffs come, Jokic is probably playing like 38, 40 minutes a night. Because, I mean, we keep talking about the others and we don't know what we're going to get from them. So you're probably thinking internally they might be having some of those same thoughts. So it's like, yeah, we're going to have Jokic out there almost all the time. So we're going to start practicing you now with these lineups as that might become a night-to-night thing as we get into the postseason. But if he's doing that, it's only going to make him more gassed. And I just feel like this team might get ate up on the inside. Because, I mean, we can talk all day about, like, oh, who are they going to match up with in the front court? Like, you know, the Lakers take that spot. They're probably in as an 8 seed. So, I mean, if the Nuggets keep their 1 spot, that's the matchup that Jokic has to deal with AD. On the other hand, it might not even be a big man. It could be somebody like Shea, one of the greatest slashers in the league right now, as a guard. And so it's like, no matter who they face, there's a good chance 1 through 5 that they're going to be against somebody who is going to attack the paint at the top of the league level. And that's dangerous. That's really dangerous. And I mean, it's not unheard of that we see 1 seeds get taken the distance. It just happened last year. I mean, the Suns got taken to 6 by a Pelicans team that didn't even have Zion. Now, they were playing pretty well and got pretty hot. But it's like this conference top to bottom, pretty similar, and even more so to where you really are not safe. And so as we go to this last stretch, you mentioned that strength of schedule where they play the Kings, they play the Suns. Those are big morale games because say they do get through the first round, now you're probably playing one of those teams in the second. And at that point, if you lose these games, yeah, you still might be the 1 seed. But what does that say about you as you enter this 7-game series against a team that just got these wins against you? Is that going to fuel you? Or is that going to shut you down? Or on the other hand, if you win that game, are you going to think, oh, we can beat them and come out flat? Or, I mean, is that going to be the morale that projects you to beat them? So it's all about wins and losses here and taking it the right way. I don't think their seeding is going to change, but either way, win or loss, how they respond to these games is going to be super important to their chances as we get past this.
Yeah, a couple things. And this is why I'm like more so agreeing like with the conversation we had a couple weeks ago about them being contenders or not, about them not really being that serious of contenders, because there's a couple things that I just have issues with. One, I got to keep it very consistent because I think it was last season when Nikola Jokic started to become a better defender, and we could see it visibly. Like he was, being a decent shot blocker at times in key moments and getting a lot of deflections and just being in the right spots. He hasn't been as good defensively this season. We got to keep it consistent. I don't care what the advanced numbers say. I know he's like, if you look at, I think defensive box plus minus, he's like number 1 in the league. He's not. Like, we got to keep that consistent. We got to keep it honest. He's not. So he has to at least put forth the effort on that side of the floor for this team to be taking any types of serious in the postseason. And another thing, which is what Gabe kind of alluded to, when Jokic is going to be playing 38, 40, 42 minutes a game in the postseason, yes, that's fine. Like, that's fine. He is their best player and everything. But we've seen time and time again, this is a perimeter-centric league. And you got to have guys on the wing, guys at the guard position that can get after it in the postseason. And I think we're going to see the same thing with Philly. It's going to determine a lot with like James Harden, Tyrese Maxey, what those guys are going to be able to do in playoff series. We've seen what years AD was getting his in New Orleans in the postseason, but his guards weren't doing that much, and that's why they would lose those series against teams that were just more talented than them. That's why we have to see Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr. Those guys have to be on their A games. It doesn't matter how good Jokic is in postseason, because historically Jokic is a good playoff performer. He's going to get his numbers for sure. He's going to impact the game, but it's not going to help if Jamal Murray regresses in the postseason and Michael Porter Jr. is not that good in the playoffs. Those guys are really the key, and I guess kind of foreshadowing like they are the X factors for this team once it comes to the postseason.
Definitely. I mean, Giannis needs his Chris Middleton down the stretch to hit those shots, and it's not going to be any different for Jokic. So Jamal Murray and MPJ are going to be massive. What they can get off their bench are going to be massive. And even though Jokic is going to have to play a lot of minutes, they still need someone to play some backup center minutes too, which has been a real problem for them. Even though they brought in Thomas Bryant, he just hasn't looked the same since he's joined the Nuggets. So definitely some things to consider with this Nuggets team. As we mentioned, still a good team, but how much success they can actually have come the postseason could be a little bit more in question.